Please just let me see him.
I ain't gonna hurt him, ma'am. I'm just holding him for a moment.
He was at the gate when the weight left her arms. The baby slid, her knees buckled, and she made a sound that wasn't a word. Don't let him fall. He lunged without thinking, hands out, catching the child against his chest just before dirt. I got him. The words surprised him. The woman folded forward, palms scraping wood, breath tearing in and out. Please. Food. He looked at the baby first, then at her. The child was warm and too light. How long you been walking? She shook her head, then tried again. Too long. The baby whimpered, a thin sound, then went quiet when the man adjusted his grip wrong and then less wrong. He didn't know where to put his hands. He held like he was holding blame. She tried to stand and failed. He stepped closer, still holding the child, unsure where to look. Easy. Don't take him. I'm not. You don't know me. I know. The baby's face pressed into his shirt and the quiet spread. It unnerved him. Silence wasn't normal at a gate. He smelled dust and sweat and milk gone sour. He glanced back at the chain on the gate, the lock set firm. He had put it there for a reason. He had kept it closed for years. Please, she said again, smaller. He shifted the baby, feeling the tiny weight settle like a verdict. Food first, he said, then corrected himself. I mean inside. She nodded, eyes fixed on the child. Don't drop him. I won't. He believed it. The latch was stiff. He fumbled one-handed, jaw tight. The baby breathed, steady. The man breathed to match it. He opened the gate. The hinge cried. The woman flinched at the sound. They hear that, she said. Who? He didn't wait. He stepped back, holding the baby closer. Inside, he said again. Now. She dragged herself forward, boots scraping, hand on the post. You sure? No, the baby stirred and let out a sharp cry that cut the air. The man crossed the line and the gate swung wider, the sound swallowed as the door beyond waited. He paused with the child against him, heart loud, thoughts thin. She leaned on the post, eyes glassy, watching his hands. You ever held one? No, don't lock your arms. He loosened, scared. The baby settled again. See? Don't tell me. I am. He nodded once. The gate stood open like a mouth. He stepped through. She followed, one step, then another. If this is a trick, it ain't. If you turn me in, I won't. Why? He looked at the child. Because you asked. The baby breathed and the asking stopped. He moved toward the door and the dark took them in. Behind them the hinge side shut. She exhaled like she had been holding a year. Thank you. He didn't answer. He kept walking, careful now, the baby held steady, the world narrowed to the weight and the next step. Nothing else mattered. He chose the inside over the road and did not look back. The door waited and the light fell away. He set the baby down on the rough wooden table. The infant's legs flailed. She snapped, careful. He eats first. He looked at her, slow, puzzled. I know, he said. You don't. She leaned forward, hands shaking as she adjusted the blanket around the child. I'm learning fast, he said, voice low. She didn't answer. The silence stretched between them like a thin rope, pulled tight. He moved to the stove, lighting the last scraps of kindling. Smoke curled, hung heavy in the low cabin ceiling. She sat, watching, knees drawn up, one hand never leaving the baby. Food came first. Hard bread, water lukewarm in a chipped mug. She ate with trembling fingers. He handed the baby a bottle, unsure if he should, if he knew how. The child sucked at it like it had been waiting. She corrected him when he tilted it wrong. Hold it like this, she said, guiding his hands. He obeyed. He wasn't proud. He didn't pretend. The baby's eyes caught his, dark and serious, as if assessing him. He shifted uncomfortably under the gaze. He noticed the badge nailed to the wall, rusted and dull. He had not touched it in years. It was watching them too. You feed him like that every day? She asked, voice tight. Every day I remember, he said, keeping eyes on her hands. She didn't respond. The baby kicked its legs, squealing softly. He let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. She glanced at the badge again. That's old, she said. You keep it for memories? He shrugged. Or reminders. Don't matter. She nodded, not pushing. The baby's gaze shifted between them both, large and curious. They both felt it, the quiet assessment, the small weight of responsibility pressing down. He went to fetch more water from the pitcher in the corner, careful not to jostle the child. She reached out instinctively and brushed his arm. Steady, she said. He stopped, letting the water sit. I know, he said, and waited while she watched. There was no rush. The cabin's walls, darkened by smoke and age, seemed to close around them, pressing with unspoken rules. They were two strangers negotiating space, safety, trust inch by inch, word by word. She set the baby down in a folded blanket on the table, then leaned against the wall, knees bent, arms wrapped around herself. You're quiet, he said. I'm listening, she said. To what? Everything. The baby's hands reached out, grasping at the thin air between them. He watched and mimicked, lifting his own hand as if it could connect. The child's lips moved, sucking, searching. He leaned closer to watch. She shook her head faintly. Let him, she whispered. He nodded, careful, as if his touch could break everything. The table creaked under weight, the fire snapped, and for a moment the world outside the cabin seemed gone. She took a bite of bread, slow, careful. He handed her the mug, water lukewarm, steam rising faintly, twisting like smoke over a still fire. Drink, he said. She didn't. You'll need it. She took it anyway, small sips. The baby watched. He watched. The badge caught light, dull glinting from the corner, and both of them noticed, but said nothing. You gonna tell me why you're here? He asked. She shook her head. Not yet. Someday? Maybe. The baby stirred, fussing, and she shushed it softly, leaning close. He won't stay quiet long, she said. I know. He adjusted the blanket, careful, letting her hands guide him. She looked at him then, directly, eyes steady despite the fear lurking there. You trust me? He asked. I don't have a choice, she said. The corners of her mouth twitched. Not a smile. Not a scowl. Just acknowledgement. The fire snapped again, small pieces of ash floating into the low light. He went to the shelf, brought down the last can of beans, setting it on the counter. She leaned over to help open it. Fingers brushed, brief, electric. She froze for a second, then went back to the baby. You hungry? He asked. She nodded, shaking. They ate in silence, sharing small glances, measuring each other. The baby stared at him like it knew something about him he didn't know himself. You ever have one of these before? She asked. No, he said. Ever had to hold one that wasn't yours? Not really, he said. She didn't push. The baby yawned, tiny mouth wide. He rocked the blanket gently. She watched, quiet. The cabin seemed to breathe with them, walls holding secrets. Outside, wind pressed against the wood, but inside, only the scrape of chair legs, the drip from the roof, and the baby's small noises existed. Where you from? He asked, finally. She shook her head. Don't ask. I did. She looked at him, eyes shadowed. I said don't ask. He didn't. Not again. The baby reached for him, tiny fingers brushing his thumb. He held still. She exhaled. For a moment, no words were needed. Just the three of them, quiet, alive in the dim cabin light, sharing warmth, survival, and the fragile trust of strangers. The badge on the wall glinted again, catching the firelight, dull and cold. He remembered its weight, remembered what it meant once. She noticed it, too. Didn't ask. Didn't speak. Just watched. The baby kicked its legs and squealed, reaching for the air between them, laughter-like and terrifying in its innocence. He leaned back against the wall, holding the blanket steady, letting her hands adjust, letting the baby be the anchor. She looked at him, eyes softening ever so slightly, and finally allowed herself a small, uneven breath. The world outside remained uncertain. Doors remained closed. The gate was still, waiting. But inside the cabin, for the first time since she appeared, the woman allowed a small fragment of relief. She ate, the baby fed, and the man learned the awkward, careful rhythm of holding life that was not his. Trust grew, small and fragile, in the quiet of the smoke-dark cabin. The badge glimmered in the corner, silent witness. Outside, the wind pressed. Inside, nothing moved but cautious hearts and a newborn settling into life. The baby fussed again, tiny cries cutting the low hum of the cabin. He held the bottle steady, eyes on the child, careful not to spill. She hovered, arms crossed, jaw tight. "You running?" he asked. She looked up, dark eyes sharp. "I'm surviving." His lips tightened. "Same thing sometimes." She shook her head. "Not for women." Silence stretched while the baby sucked, head bobbing against the bottle. He glanced at her, searching, but she refused to meet his gaze. The milk was warm enough. She came closer, adjusting the blanket around the baby. "You know what you're doing?" she asked. "I'm learning." He didn't lie. He kept the bottle steady, steadying himself more than the child. She muttered, almost to herself, "Learning fast, huh?" He said nothing. The baby's tiny fists clenched and unclenched. He noticed her hands shaking as she brushed stray hair from the infant's face. "Where you from?" he asked. Her eyes flinched. She didn't answer. "Father?" His voice was low, cautious. She froze. The baby stopped sucking, staring at the wall like he could see something behind it. "Not asking that," she said finally, almost a whisper. "Why not?" "Because it don't matter." He let it drop. The silence felt thick, pressing, as if the walls of the cabin were leaning in. He shifted the bottle, the baby sucking again. "He won't latch," she said. "Maybe he needs you." "I've tried." She stepped closer, adjusting his hand on the bottle. He watched, letting her correct him, every move careful and deliberate. The infant fussed again, curling tiny toes. She snapped, "Hold it right." He nodded, obeying. Her hands lingered, brushing his in correction. Small, deliberate, commanding. The baby let out a soft whimper. "Sorry," she muttered, cheeks burning. "For what?" "Snapping at you." He shook his head. "No snapping. Just learning." She looked down at the child, brushing his hair back. Her hands lingered, almost protective, almost fearful. He felt the weight of her gaze, heavy, silent. "You hungry?" he asked, keeping voice low. She nodded, reaching for the bread, hands trembling. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls. Inside, the cabin was quiet except for the baby's soft suckling and occasional whimpers. He moved the bottle again, letting the child settle. She exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging. "I don't trust easy," she said. "I know." He didn't push. He just kept his hands steady, the infant calm now, eyes blinking lazily. "Why here?" he asked, finally. She shook her head. "It don't matter where." The baby shifted, reaching for him. He leaned closer, careful, letting his hand brush the tiny fingers. "People hurt kids," she said suddenly, voice low. "Most do." He stayed quiet. The baby's tiny mouth opened and closed, searching. She straightened, eyes dark and wary. "Don't think he won't remember," she said. He nodded, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of that hang between them. The fire in the stove popped. Shadows danced across the walls. The baby cooed softly, tiny hands flailing. "Why help?" she asked after a long pause. He glanced down at the infant, hands firm. "Because you asked," he said simply. She looked at him, surprised, measuring the words. The baby reached for her hand, small fingers brushing hers. She let him grasp, quiet now. "Don't leave him," she said. "I won't." Her voice cracked. She bent slightly to smooth the blanket. The baby's eyes followed her, then him. It was unnerving, the way he seemed to see them both at once. A sudden knock on the door made the baby start, squealing sharply. She froze, body taut. He set the bottle down on the table, instinctively shielding the child with one arm. "Who is it?" she whispered. No answer. The knocking came again, harder this time, urgent. The infant wailed, tiny fists punching the air. She pressed herself against the wall, eyes wide, hand on his arm. "They found us?" she asked. "Not yet," he said, voice tight. "But they're coming." He went to the door cautiously, hand resting on the handle, the other cradling the baby. She followed, small, careful steps. "Do you know them?" she asked. "Kind of," he said. He twisted the knob slowly. "They don't like strangers. Especially women alone." She swallowed, lips tight, eyes fixed on the cabin floor. The baby's cries stopped when he shifted in his arms, calm against the heat of the man's chest. "Stay back," he said quietly. The door creaked as it opened. Outside, wind and shadows. No faces. No words. Just the threat of presence. She exhaled slowly, clutching the blanket tighter. The baby stirred, tiny noises softening. He looked at her, then at the door, then back to the child. "Inside," he said. She nodded, sliding back away from the door. He closed it slowly, testing the lock, the sound hollow in the quiet cabin. They returned to the table. She took the bottle again, feeding the baby gently now. He watched. She looked up once, eyes meeting his, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Trust was not spoken. It was made, fragile, earned with patience and small acts. He shifted closer, letting the firelight touch them both. The badge on the wall caught a glint, dull and heavy. It watched. They both noticed, then looked away. The wind rattled the roof again. He kept his hands on the child, careful. She smoothed the blanket around the baby, careful not to brush too hard, careful of everything. Her eyes scanned the cabin walls, lingering on corners, shadows, small details. He didn't comment. She didn't need him to. The baby finally quieted, head resting against her chest. She exhaled, letting her body slump slightly against the wall. He kept watch, steady, silent, feeling the weight of them both in the small room. Time passed, measured by the soft rhythm of the baby's breathing and the occasional crack of the fire. Outside, the world pressed in, uncertain and dangerous. Inside, survival was quiet, intimate, fragile. She watched him, he watched her. The child slept, light against them, small warmth against the dark. They existed in the moment, nothing more, nothing less, caught between fear and necessity, learning slowly how to keep life alive in hands that had never held it before. The knock on the door wasn't the first warning, but it was the sharpest. Outside, hooves pounded dirt, dust swirling. Two men appeared at the fence, dark shapes against the late afternoon sun. They didn't call, didn't smile. Their eyes swept the cabin, slow and assessing. He stepped back, the baby cradled tight. She pressed herself against the wall, tiny hand brushing the child's head. "You seen a woman pass through?" one of them asked, voice low, rough. "Plenty of women pass through," he said, keeping his stance calm, casual. This one bled. The words hung in the air. He didn't flinch. "Most do," he said, voice even. The baby whimpered softly, tiny fists curling. The men's eyes flicked to the cabin doorway, then to him. He felt his hand brush the old rifle in the corner, not touching it, just remembering the weight, remembering how it felt in situations like this. The woman's eyes were wide. Her hand lingered on the baby's back. "They won't leave," she whispered. "Not without what they want," he said. The men waited. Silence stretched, thick and threatening. The baby squirmed, crying, tiny mouth open. He held tighter. The cries made the men pause, eyes narrowing. The wind pushed at the cabin, rattling the boards. "You hiding her?" one asked. "Who's her?" he said, voice steady. The men shifted. "Don't play dumb," the other said. "We know she's here." He stepped slightly in front of the woman, not fully blocking, just a gesture of warning. "We don't take kindly to strangers," one said. The baby cried louder, and the woman rocked him slightly, whispering soft, calming noises. The men glanced down at the child. One of them spat, dirt landing in the dust. "He's just a kid." "That's still someone," he said, voice low. The men's eyes swept the cabin again, slow, calculated. The wind shifted, bringing dust across the porch. The baby shrieked, small arms flailing. He adjusted, holding the child closer, letting her hands rest on the blanket. The cabin felt smaller, darker. Outside authority pressed in, uninvited, its weight heavy on the walls. "You know him?" she asked quietly, voice barely audible. "Kind of," he said. He didn't explain. The men's silence was louder than their words. The tension hummed. He noticed every movement, the shift of weight in boots, the tightening of hands on reins, the glint of sunlight on steel buckles. The baby blinked at the door, small eyes wide, unafraid. He felt the odd weight of innocence in the midst of danger. "Last warning," one said, voice sharp. "We'll be back." The hooves lifted, then the men slowed, retreating, dust trailing in their wake. The woman exhaled slowly, shoulders slumping. She slid down the wall, tiny hands clutching the baby. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. She nodded, eyes still wide, tracing the retreating shapes. "They'll come back," she said. "They always do," he said. The baby whimpered again, tiny sound fragile and alive. He adjusted the blanket around the child, hands careful, steady. The woman's hand lingered, brushing his sleeve. "Didn't think we'd get this far," she said. "Neither did I," he said. They both listened to the wind pressing against the cabin, carrying whispers of unknown threats. Silence filled the space, heavy, dense. The baby cooed softly, head resting against his chest. He let her hands linger on the blanket, let her presence ground him. The wall seemed to lean in, shadowed corners pressing, the cabin small and tense. Outside, dust settled, hooves fading. The woman exhaled, shivering. "I hate that they know," she said. "So do I," he said, voice quiet but firm. The baby stirred, tiny fingers curling into the blanket. He held steady, the child anchoring him, holding the tension at bay. The men had gone for now, but their presence lingered. Authority without mercy, eyes unblinking, always watching. She straightened, wiping her hands on her pants, looking at the baby. "He's quiet now." "For the moment," he said. "They'll return." "Then we'll be ready," she said, voice low but certain. He glanced at the old rifle, still resting in the corner. Not raised, just remembered. The walls absorbed the tension, thick and suffocating, but the cabin held. They were two against the weight pressing outside, fragile, determined. The baby yawned, small sound breaking the heavy quiet. He adjusted the blanket, letting the child settle against him. She stayed close, hand on the tiny chest. "You always this calm?" she asked, voice soft, wary. "Not always," he said. "But right now I have to be." Outside, the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching. The dust hung in the air. Silence pressed, unbroken. Inside, life continued, small and fragile, anchored by the baby and the choices they had made. The men disappeared behind the fence line, distant now but still present in thought, in warning, in the weight pressing on the cabin. He held the infant tight, eyes sweeping the threshold, listening. She leaned slightly forward, brushing the blanket around the baby, whispering soft words of comfort. The baby's small hands reached out, touching them both. The tension remained, but for a moment, inside, they survived. Outside would come again. But for now, the cabin, the walls, the firelight, and the quiet breaths held them steady. She sat on the edge of the table, hands resting lightly on the baby's back. His small fingers curled into the blanket as she smoothed it over him. "They don't lose things," she said finally, voice low, almost trembling. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching. "People ain't things," he said. She laughed briefly, sharp, humorless. "To them, I was." The words hung between them like smoke. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The baby squirmed, tiny noises soft, and her hand lingered on his head, protective, certain. "Who?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not the point." The air in the cabin pressed heavy, tight, smelling faintly of burnt wood and old dust. She looked out the window, dark eyes tracking the road they had come from, or maybe the one they might have to leave behind. They have names. They have land. They have power. They don't care about anything else. She exhaled slowly, head dropping slightly. The baby let out a small cry. She shushed him softly, hand brushing across the tiny face. "You ever lose something like that?" she asked. Her voice was barely audible, almost swallowed by the cabin walls. He didn't answer immediately. "Sometimes," he said, low, careful. She glanced at him, eyes sharp, assessing. "Sometimes is not enough." "It's all I've got," he said. She nodded, not pushing further. The baby reached for her, tiny fingers clutching at the blanket. She let him, letting her hand rest lightly on the infant's back. He watched her, noting the way she balanced fear and defiance, strength and fragility. "They take what they want," she said, voice harder now, almost edge of anger. "Not anymore," he said. Her eyes narrowed. "You think standing here in this cabin changes anything?" He didn't answer. He just adjusted the baby, careful hands steadying the blanket. She shifted, leaning slightly forward, eyes fixed on the child. "He doesn't deserve this," she said softly. He nodded, letting the words pass. The baby cooed faintly, tiny movements stirring the quiet. She touched his head lightly, brushing stray hair from the baby's face. "Promise me," she said. "I'm listening," he said. "That you won't let them take him." He looked down at the infant, hands firm but gentle. "I won't." She exhaled, body sagging slightly, tension leaving in slow increments. "Good," she said. "Because if they take him, I don't know if I'd—" her voice broke, stopped. He didn't speak. He just let her sit with the fear, let her acknowledge it without interference. The baby's fingers brushed her hand again. She clenched them gently around the tiny fist. "He's ours," she said softly, almost to herself. He watched, the weight of her words settling in the small cabin. The walls seemed to lean in closer, darkened by smoke and shadows, carrying the memories and threats that had trailed her here. Outside, the wind pressed, but inside, the space held, steady, fragile. The infant's small sounds filled the cabin with life, tiny and alive, resisting the darkness beyond the walls. "You didn't have to tell me," he said, voice quiet, low. "I needed to," she said, looking up. Her eyes were sharp, haunted, but steady now. "You've held him. You've seen what they take." He nodded, hands resting lightly on the blanket. "I've seen." Silence followed, heavy but not suffocating. The baby's small coos and whimpers filled the gaps, a fragile rhythm anchoring them both. She exhaled slowly, leaning back slightly. "They're coming," she said. "I know," he said, voice flat but firm. "But you won't give him up," she whispered. "Never," he said. The baby squirmed in response, tiny fists curling, tiny mouth opening, letting out faint cries. She bent slightly, brushing his tiny head, reassuring herself as much as the child. He watched her. He understood the weight of her promise, the anchor it became, both for the infant and for him. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin, rattling loose boards. Inside, the fire burned low, crackling softly. She adjusted the blanket again, smoothing it over the baby, eyes steady now, dark but certain. He grips, she said, noticing the tiny fingers clinging to his thumb. Good, he said, almost quietly, letting the small touch anchor him too. For a moment, nothing else existed except the baby, the promise, the fragile safety they'd carved out in a cabin pressed against wind, dust, and threats beyond the walls. You'll need him to hold on, she said softly. I know, he said. He didn't need to ask why. The baby slept lightly now, small fingers brushing her hand. She exhaled slowly, relaxing a fraction, leaning back against the wall. He shifted, letting the child rest more comfortably, careful not to jostle, careful not to break the fragile trust being built. Outside, the dust settled on the earth. Inside, the weight of survival pressed gently, but steadily, anchoring them together. She looked at him once more, eyes dark but calm. Thank you, she said. For what? He didn't answer immediately. For staying. He shrugged faintly, hands still steady on the baby. Doesn't feel like enough. She shook her head lightly. It is. Silence filled the cabin again, broken only by the tiny sounds of the child breathing, small movements, fragile life pressing against the walls. The badge on the wall caught a glint of firelight, dull and heavy, watching quietly. She leaned forward slightly, brushing hair from the baby's eyes again. We'll get through this, she said. He didn't answer, just nodded. The baby's small hands twitched, tiny toes curling. She smiled faintly, small, almost imperceptible. He watched, letting her words settle, letting the infant's presence steady them both. The cabin held its breath with them, the walls absorbing tension and fear alike. Outside, the wind blew, uncertain and sharp. Inside, life held, small and determined, anchored in hands careful enough to keep it alive. She watched him shift the baby, tiny hands gripping the blanket as if feeling the tension in the room. Her eyes lingered on the wall, on the rusted badge nailed near the doorway. You law? She asked finally, voice low, cautious. He glanced at it, hesitation in his posture. He said. He didn't elaborate. She leaned slightly forward, curious. Why'd you quit? Didn't quit, he said, voice flat. Her brow furrowed, searching his face, trying to measure what he meant. Then why hang it there? He said nothing. Just shifted the infant in his arms, careful, deliberate, as if the weight of the child grounded him against old memories. I see it, she said softly, pointing. Every time I look, I see it. He didn't argue. The badge was dull, edges worn. A symbol of something he had once been, once fought for, once failed with. People remember, she said. Even when the town pretends they don't. He nodded slowly, adjusting the blanket again, letting the baby settle more comfortably against him. Her gaze softened slightly. What happened? Same family, he said. Power. They don't care. They push. I stood in the way. They ran me off. She didn't respond immediately, just let the words hang. Outside, wind pressed against the walls. Inside, the cabin held its breath. The baby stirred, tiny fingers brushing his thumb. He looked down at him, hand firm but gentle. It's okay, he whispered. She reached forward instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from the child's face. They'll come, she said, voice low. They always do. He didn't argue. He let her words settle, letting the history, the weight, the warning press against the walls without flinching. The badge glinted faintly in the firelight, heavy and cold, a silent witness. Why keep it? She asked, finally. He hesitated. Reminders, he said. Sometimes lessons. Sometimes regrets. She nodded, dark eyes fixed on the wall. The baby yawned, small, stretching limbs against the blanket. Do you still follow the law? She asked. He shook his head. Not here. Not anymore. But the rules still matter sometimes. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with things neither would voice. The wind rattled the cabin boards. Outside, shadows stretched long. Inside, the fire flickered. He shifted, adjusting the baby again. You want to see it? He asked, motioning to the badge. She leaned forward cautiously. What for? To understand. Or not, he said. He took the badge from the wall, letting the weight rest in his palm. It was heavier than she expected. The metal was cold, edges rough. The baby stirred, tiny sounds soft against his chest. She watched, silent, letting the moment settle. It's just a badge, she said finally. Doesn't mean anything now. He shook his head slightly. It means something. It's a reminder. The firelight caught the metal again. He turned it slowly in his hands, letting the child rest quietly. They tried to erase it. Erase me, he said, voice low. Didn't work. She nodded, understanding in her own way. They'll try again, she said. They always do. He didn't answer. He just shifted, holding the baby steady, feeling the tiny heartbeat press against him, grounding him against threats, memory, and fear alike. A distant sound of hooves made both of them stiffen. She glanced at him. Closer this time, she whispered. He didn't look at her. Instead, he listened, felt the weight of the cabin, the baby, the badge heavy in his hand. They'll come, he said. The badge was returned to the wall, left heavy and silent. He kept the child close, careful, deliberate. She watched, small fingers brushing the blanket. Outside, the world pressed. Inside, history lingered, warnings hung, but for now, they survived. Why didn't you just leave? She asked. He shook his head. Couldn't. Not like this. Not with him. She looked at the infant, tiny features calm against the blanket. He trusts you already. Doesn't know me, he said. Yet. She exhaled, letting her hands rest lightly on the baby's chest. He will, she said softly. Outside, the wind shifted again. Inside, the cabin held its own, walls breathing quietly with them. The badge on the wall, silent witness, heavy, grounding, a reminder of everything past and everything coming. The baby stirred again, small coos and stretches. He shifted, hands careful, eyes glancing at her briefly. Keep your eyes on him, she said. Always, he said. They didn't need more words. Outside, hooves pressed closer, unseen but felt. Inside, the cabin remained, walls holding secrets, the badge heavy in memory, the child calm against the tension. For now, nothing moved except breaths, small hands, and quiet, tense survival. The hooves came first, distant and steady, then sharper, closer, shaking dust across the porch. He felt the rhythm in his chest. She held the baby tighter, tiny hands clutching his blanket, eyes wide but steady. Hand her over, one voice called, low, rough. He shifted, cradling the child more firmly. No, he said. The wind pressed through the open door, rattling boards, whispering threats they didn't need to name. That ain't your child, another voice spat. He didn't flinch. Neither are you, he said quietly, voice even but cold. She stepped in front of the baby, body small but defiant. He stepped beside her, not in front, letting her shield the child while making clear he wasn't backing down. The men's eyes flicked between them, assessing, calculating. The tension pressed the cabin walls inward. You think you can hide from us? One asked, spitting into the dust. I'm not hiding, he said. I'm standing. The baby cooed faintly, tiny sound almost mocking the danger outside. She glanced down at him, brushing a hand across the blanket, steadying the child. Don't move, she whispered. He nodded, hand near the door, the old rifle resting within reach, remembered more than touched. One of the riders dismounted slowly, boots scraping dirt. Step aside, he said. I said no, the mountain man said. The wind shifted again, rattling the cabin. The baby's eyes widened, staring at the dark shapes outside, tiny fists curling. She pressed herself slightly against the wall, watching the men closely, waiting for any sign of weakness. There was none. Only patience, tension, and the rhythm of danger pressing on all sides. Last chance, one said, voice hard, teeth showing. No, he said again. The writer's hand hovered near a weapon, paused, deliberate, calculated. She held the baby closer, tiny body pressed to hers. "You'll lose everything," the writer said. "Already did," he said, calm, low, a weight in his voice heavier than any threat. Outside, dust rose, wind pressed, and the shadows moved with quiet menace. The baby stirred, small coos and cries, tiny fingers reaching out. She glanced down, brushing his cheek, whispering soft words of reassurance. He shifted, adjusting the child in his arms. The tension was sharp now, cutting the air, pressing them together, forcing them to measure every movement, every sound. The men outside hesitated, unsure, calculating. The cabin walls seemed to hold their breath. One rider stepped closer, boots scraping against wood. "Move," he said again. "Not until we leave," he said. She pressed closer to him instinctively, tiny fingers brushing his arm. He shifted slightly, letting her stance remain protective, letting the baby rest against her chest. "You don't scare me," he said, voice low, steady, calm. The men paused. Something in the cabin, in the silence, in the child's presence, held them at bay. The wind rattled the doorframe again. He could hear their breathing, horses shifting, eyes on the darkened cabin. She exhaled slowly, small hand resting lightly on the baby. "He knows," she whispered. "Knows what?" "Enough." The infant kicked slightly, tiny movements anchoring them, steadying the tension. He adjusted, keeping eyes on the men outside, silent, deliberate, waiting for the first mistake. A gunshot rang out in the distance, not fired, just chambered, warning in sound and threat. The baby cried sharply, startling, and she whispered soft words, brushing his hair back. The men hesitated, hooves shifting in the dust. He stepped slightly closer to the door, keeping the baby safe, watching, waiting. The woman remained between the men and the child, small, defiant, unflinching. Time stretched, measured in shallow breaths and small movements. The men finally drew back, hooves kicking up dust, eyes lingering, warning heavy in their absence. "For now," one called, voice fading, "we'll be back." She slid against the wall, releasing the baby's blanket slowly, hands trembling slightly. "They'll come again," she said softly. "I know," he said. The infant's tiny hands gripped his thumb, anchoring him to the moment, to the choice he had already made. Outside, shadows faded into dust and wind. Inside, the cabin held, heavy, silent, tense. She exhaled, brushing her fingers across the blanket. "We survived," she said quietly. "For now," he said, steady, eyes sweeping the doorway, listening. The baby's small coos broke the silence, delicate and alive, reminding them both that life, fragile as it was, persisted. The walls held, the badge on the wall glinting faintly, silent witness to their stand. The first shot didn't hit, just a warning. The cabin door rattled, boards shivering. Dust rose. The men's voices shouted over each other, harsh, angry. "Get down," he yelled, shifting the baby closer, arms tight around the tiny body. She ducked, pressing him against her chest, low and fast. "Don't touch him," she spat at the nearest rider, eyes dark with fire. "You started this," one of the riders yelled. "No." "You did," he said, voice steady, cold. The rifle rested against his shoulder, finger ready but careful. The baby cried, tiny high-pitched wails cutting through the chaos. He leaned closer, whispering soft words, steadying the blanket around him. She pressed her face into his chest, breathing fast, chest rising and falling in rhythm with the baby. A scuffle at the door, boots against wood. One of the men stumbled, caught himself on the frame. The other two shouted, indecision in their stance. He moved, careful, deliberate, using the doorframe as cover. "Don't come closer," he said, voice low, hard. One rider faltered, weight shifting wrong. He didn't hesitate. A shot cracked, loud, sharp. Blood spattered against the wooden floor. A body fell, heavy, crashing in a tangle of limbs. She gasped, eyes wide, tiny hand pressing the baby to her chest. "He's okay," he said quickly, voice firm, as if the words themselves could hold the infant together. "We're okay," she whispered, rocking the child slightly. The other riders glanced at each other, uncertainty now replacing aggression. Outside, hooves scraped, indecision pressing. The wind shifted, dust swirling around the cabin walls. He adjusted the rifle again, breathing shallow. The baby's cries had stopped, tiny fingers clutching at the blanket. She pressed closer, whispering softly, brushing hair from the infant's eyes. "Get down," he yelled, voice rising as the remaining men hesitated. One lunged, misjudged distance, and he fired again, low, deliberate. The cabin shook with the recoil. The man fell, blood dark against the boards. She exhaled sharply, pressing herself against the wall, eyes wide and haunted. "They'll come back," she said, voice trembling. "They always do," he said. He lowered the rifle slightly, scanning, adjusting, careful to protect the child. The baby's tiny hands reached up instinctively, brushing the edges of the blanket. She murmured soft words, gentle, calm, trying to smooth the tension like water over stone. One rider staggered back, hooves retreating, eyes wide. The others followed slowly, leaving dust in their wake, leaving threats unfinished but palpable. She slid to the floor, tiny hands on the infant, brushing hair from his face. "We survived," she whispered, shaking. He didn't respond, only kept his eyes on the doorway, rifle resting lightly against the wall, fingers still near the trigger. The floorboards were slick with blood now, dark against the wood grain. He didn't flinch at it, only noted it, remembered it, the permanence of it pressing down. She looked at him, eyes haunted. "Will they come back?" she asked. "Yes," he said quietly. The baby stirred, small movements, tiny fingers curling. She adjusted the blanket, smoothing it over him, murmuring soft words of reassurance. The cabin smelled of smoke, sweat, and blood. Outside, the wind rattled the walls, pressing against the door. Silence settled between chaos, small, fragile. He leaned back slightly, watching, listening, the weight of the infant heavy in his arms. She pressed herself against the wall, holding the child close, breathing uneven, chest rising and falling in small, shallow waves. He knelt slightly, adjusting the baby, tiny fingers clutching his thumb. "He's okay," he said again. She nodded, exhaling slowly, trying to steady herself. Outside, dust swirled, hooves faded, but the threat remained, hanging like a shadow. Inside, blood soaked into old floorboards, permanent, a reminder. The baby whimpered softly, tiny sounds fragile but alive. She brushed his cheek, whispered softly, and for a fleeting moment, life continued despite violence, despite fear. They were quiet then, hands steady, hearts racing, the cabin holding them. The blood would stain forever, the echoes of violence lingering. But the child was alive, breathing, small hands curling. She looked at him, and he at her. No words. Nothing was solved. Only survival, fragile and incomplete, pressing them together. The wind rattled again, dust shifting outside. Inside, the cabin held, tense and still, anchored by small hands, steady breaths, and a shared, unspoken resolve. The cabin was quiet now, except for the soft breaths of the baby and the low crackle of the fire. She knelt on the floor, tiny hands cleaning dark streaks from the old wood, careful not to jostle him. "You didn't have to," she said quietly, voice rough with exhaustion. He sat on the edge of the table, hands resting lightly on the blanket, eyes sweeping the doorway. "I know," he said. "They'll come back," she said, still brushing, slow and deliberate. "I know," he said again. His tone was calm, steady, though his hands trembled slightly when he lifted the blanket to adjust the child. She sighed, exhaling into the heavy cabin air. "Leaving won't save us," she said. "No," he said softly. "Staying might not either." They both knew it, the weight of the land pressing in, dark and unmoving outside the walls. The baby stirred, tiny fists curling, cooing softly. She held him close, rocking gently, brushing her fingers over his small head. "He's alive," she said softly. "And safe, for now." He leaned back, hands resting on the table, eyes tracing the walls, the shadows. "That's all that matters right now," he said. She didn't argue. The cabin smelled of smoke and blood, and the old wood soaked it in, dark and permanent. She glanced at him, eyes tired but sharp. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "No. Couldn't," he said. She watched his hands, steadying the blanket, careful with each motion. "Even now," she said, voice low, even knowing what might come next. He didn't answer, only adjusted the baby slightly, letting the small movements calm him, steady him. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls, loose boards rattling softly. The shadows of trees swayed in the dustlit evening. She exhaled slowly, pressing the infant closer. "They won't leave the land alone," she said. "Neither will we," he said quietly. His voice was firm, heavy with understanding. She nodded, small movements, tiny gestures of agreement. The baby stirred again, tiny sounds pressing into the quiet cabin. "You holding on?" she asked softly. "Always," he said. She exhaled, brushing his hair lightly, resting her cheek briefly against the child. "And you?" he asked. "I'm surviving," she said, voice low. They both laughed briefly, tension breaking for a heartbeat. The baby cooed in response, tiny fingers brushing her hand. Life persisted, fragile but defiant, pressed between the old wood and the weight of the past outside. She stood slowly, brushing herself off, hands lingering lightly on the blanket. "We need to stay ready," she said. "I know," he said, shifting slightly, eyes on the doorway, old rifle resting near his hand. Silence settled again, heavy, dense. The baby stirred, tiny eyes opening, looking between them. She smiled faintly, small, careful. "He trusts us," she said. "Doesn't know it yet," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "He will," she said. The cabin held them, heavy with smoke, blood, and memory. Outside, the wind rattled the boards, carrying distant sounds of dust and movement. Inside, life continued, fragile, tentative, pressing against the dark. She looked at him again, tired but resolved. "We're here," she said softly. "For now," he said. Tiny fingers clutched hers, brushing lightly, holding them both in place. The baby shifted, cooing faintly, small movements anchoring them to the cabin, to each other, to survival. Outside, the threat lingered, inevitable. Inside, they remained, heavy with understanding, quiet, alive. He lifted the rifle slightly, testing weight, resting it against his shoulder. She pressed the blanket closer to the child, eyes tracking shadows. "Nothing left to do but wait," she said. "And hold," he said. "Always hold," she whispered. The baby reached for them both, tiny hands bridging space, anchoring moment and memory. Dust settled slowly outside. Inside, the cabin breathed with them, old wood, blood, and fragile life holding the promise of what remained. The wind pressed against the cabin again, rattling loose boards. He shifted the baby in his arms, small hands clutching the blanket. "We need to move it," he said, voice low. She glanced up, dark eyes wary. "Where?" "The well," he said. "Old one. Nobody goes there." She nodded slowly, understanding the weight in his words. Outside, the air smelled of dust and iron. Shadows leaned over the earth like watching things. They moved carefully, steps slow, avoiding dry branches that would crack underfoot. The baby stirred, small whimpers, tiny hands reaching out. She held him closer, murmuring soft words. "People say things live down there," she said, voice low. He glanced at her, brow furrowed. "People say lots of things," he said. The air smelled damp near the old stone, earth pressed against them, heavy with memory. The well yawned dark, water black and still. Moss clung to stones like ancient teeth. She knelt slightly, brushing dirt from the edge, careful. "Some things stay hungry," he said. She looked up, eyes narrow, scanning the shadows. The baby laughed suddenly, a sound high and wrong, echoing off stone, bouncing into the dark. She froze, heart skipping. He shifted, hands steady on the blanket, adjusting the infant. "Did he just laugh?" she whispered. "Yeah," he said, voice low, careful. "Wrong, isn't it?" She swallowed, pressing the child closer. "Not natural." He ignored it, watching the shadows, listening to the wind shift through the trees. The well yawned black and empty, a warning as old as the land. They knelt together, small hands steadying the baby, eyes on the stone edge. She leaned forward, brushing a loose leaf from the top. We bury it here? She asked. Yes, he said. Careful. Keep him steady. She adjusted the blanket, tiny fingers brushing his. The infant squirmed, small coos echoing softly. Dust from the edge settled on their hands. They lowered the bundle of what needed hiding, careful, deliberate, heavy with weight. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling trees, pressing against their backs. People used to fear this well, she said softly, voice almost swallowed by wind. He nodded, silent, watching the dark water, feeling the pull of memory in the stone. Some fear is real, he said. She exhaled slowly, pressing the baby to her chest, listening to his soft breathing. Some is just stories, she said. Stories with teeth, he whispered. The baby kicked lightly, tiny hands brushing both of theirs, anchoring them to the moment. They stepped back, leaving the earth covered, careful. The well yawned dark and still, heavy, silent, holding secrets. We can't leave traces, he said. Not even dust. She nodded, brushing soil from her hands, eyes wary. The wind rattled the branches overhead. The baby cooed faintly, light and wrong against the weight pressing the air. She whispered soft, calming words. He kept watch, hand resting lightly on the blanket, tiny fingers curling. For a moment, nothing moved except their breaths and the soft sounds of the child. The world pressed, heavy and watching. They exhaled together, letting small movements anchor them. We stay near? She asked. Yes, he said. The shadows around the well shifted with the wind, as if alive, patient, hungry in memory but not yet in action. The infant laughed again, wrong and joyful, echoing into the dark stone. They'll come, she said softly. And we'll be ready, he said. She pressed the baby closer, brushing the tiny head. The wind shifted again, carrying distant sounds, shadows pressed closer. But for now, inside the weight of memory and myth, life held. The well yawned behind them, dark, permanent, full of warning. The baby squirmed, small fists curling. Hands steady, breaths shallow, they left it behind, careful, deliberate, anchored in the fragile moment that survived. Outside, torches flickered in the distance, tiny lights in the dark. She looked at him, eyes wide, heart tight. They know, she whispered. Yes, he said, shifting the baby, steady, prepared. The world pressed around them, shadowed, hungry. Inside, life persisted. Tiny fingers gripped blanket and thumb alike, anchoring them both to survival, to choice, to the small defiance of being alive. The torches were closer now, flickering shadows along the trees. He shifted the baby in his arms, tiny fists curling around the blanket. She stood in front, body tense but unyielding, eyes dark, unafraid. Last chance, one of the riders called, voice carrying over the dry dirt and wind. No, she said sharply. He stepped slightly behind her, not in front, letting her stand but showing his support. You'll lose everything, the rider spat. Already did, she said, voice flat. The baby stirred, cooing faintly, tiny fingers brushing the blanket. He adjusted him, steady, hands careful. The riders shifted, uncertainty creeping into posture and tone. The shadows moved with the torchlight, pressing, but something in the land felt alive with them, watching, patient, old as the hills. You think a woman and a boy can stop us? One asked, voice rough, disbelief threaded through it. She didn't flinch. Try me, she said, eyes steady, dark, unwavering. He leaned against the cabin frame, rifle resting lightly at his side, watching, breathing steady. The baby's eyes opened, tiny pupils reflecting torchlight. He cooed softly, reaching for her. She held him closer. The riders exchanged looks, hooves shifting in the dust. Outside authority pressed, but inside the tension was anchored by defiance. She pressed herself slightly forward, unafraid, body firm. He stepped closer, hands steadying the baby against her chest. This land's seen worse, he said quietly. It's ours now, she said. Tiny fingers curled into her shirt, small weight grounding them. A long silence pressed, measured by shallow breaths, small movements, and torchlight flickering against old trees. The riders finally faltered, hesitation replacing aggression. We're not done, one warned, voice low. Not today, she said. He adjusted the baby, shifting slightly, letting the tension settle but keeping readiness in every muscle. The torches lowered slightly. They turned back, riding away slowly, shadows stretching, leaving a weight behind. The baby cooed again, small, delicate, alive. She exhaled, pressing him to her chest. They came, and they left, she whispered. For now, he said. Dust settled. Shadows pressed. Inside, the cabin, the land, and the baby held them steady, anchored to life, defiance, survival. Word count, 700. Chapter 12, held. Dawn broke soft and pale over the hills. The cabin was quiet except for the low breathing of the baby. He held him properly now, tiny hands relaxed, eyes closed against the chest. He likes you, she said softly, voice rough but warm. He don't know me, he said, adjusting the blanket. He will, she whispered, small smile tugging at her lips. The badge rested in his palm, heavy with memory. Together, they walked slowly to the well, careful. He dug a small hole near the stone edge, hands steady, deliberate. For the past, he said, placing the badge in the earth. She nodded, brushing dirt over it, letting the weight settle into the ground. The baby stirred, tiny sounds pressing lightly against their palms, anchoring them. The gate hung open, creaking softly in the wind. Outside, the land stretched, silent, watching. They didn't speak. No words were needed. He shifted slightly, rocking the child, letting tiny arms stretch, cooing softly. She leaned back against the cabin wall, eyes dark but calm, fingers brushing the blanket. Survival wasn't owned. Safety wasn't earned easily. But for now, they were here, together. The baby's small hands reached for the blanket again, then for him, tiny fists curling around his thumb. He smiled faintly, voice low. He'll know me soon enough. He already does, she said, small and certain. The wind pressed through the open gate, carrying the scent of dust and pine. They were quiet, hands steady, breathing in rhythm with the fragile life in their care. The cabin smelled faintly of smoke and earth, blood long washed but memory lingering. He rocked gently, small coos breaking the stillness. She pressed a hand against his shoulder, tiny fingers brushing his arm. We're safe, she said. Not forever. But for now. Anchored in the present. The baby's eyes opened fully, staring at them both. Recognition? Perhaps. Life, fragile, stubborn, persistent. He hummed softly, rocking, steady, careful. She smiled faintly, watching him and the child. We survived, she said. Yes, he said, voice low but calm. Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, the baby pressed against his chest, tiny fists curling, small weight grounding them. The gate creaked gently in the morning breeze. The badge slept under the dirt. The land, old and patient, seemed to breathe quietly with them. Hands held, breath steady, the mountain man and the woman with the child remained. Not saved, not owned, but finally safe. The cabin walls, the gate, the wind, and the well were witnesses. The baby cooed, small movements pressing life into the quiet morning. She leaned slightly, watching, feeling, anchored in the fragile truth, survival, when earned, was held in careful hands, steady hearts, and tiny fingers curling.